Hi everybody, it's Swank Ivy, and it's time for another Letters to an Asexual. This is number 87. Today I'm going to discuss the common misconception that asexual people are less emotional or cold or disconnected, etc. And I'm going to use a few different examples of people clearly believing in this sort of misconception, and I will also feature one letter at the end where somebody is asking questions about this, but ultimately seems like they came to an understanding that is more appropriate about us. Before I go into it, I do want to mention that just everybody of every sexual orientation obviously has different relationships with other people, socially, they're introverts, extroverts, ambiverts, whatever. There's different levels of desiring interaction with friends, there's different levels of what is considered like normal. But to the extent that I discuss this in the videos, I don't want anybody to get the idea that I'm saying there's one normal and that asexual people are, quote, normal in that they have normal social relationship. You know, like there is no specific amount of friends or amount of social interaction that is considered normal. So I'm not trying to do the thing where we say, we're just like you, we totally have friends and are definitely extroverts and love all of our social interaction and all of us need love and friendship and validation in exactly the same way. That's not the point here. But as you'll see as I discuss some of these messages that I've gotten from various places, people sometimes default to this idea that we can't have normal, quote, normal friendships and or social interaction, and that asexuality is some kind of symptom of a larger disorder and that it's interpreted as being a problem, and that asexuality is just like another inability to connect with people that they expect to see in all of our relationships, and that ultimately is a harmful idea. So, I'm going to read the first one. This was in YouTube comments, and this person opened with this. I can understand the concept of asexuality, just not its genuine practicality. Pure asexuality is closely related to nihilism and misanthropy, I think. I've been there. Sometimes you are so disgusted with humanity and its evil vapidity that sex with anyone of its creations is the last thing on your mind. It all resolves itself when you're behind a naked ass. Take care, everybody. I responded with, interesting amount of projection here. Clearly not based on a very good understanding of what asexuality is, but if overpowering hatred and disgust toward humanity is the only way you can conceptualize not being attracted to others, I guess there's not a whole lot we can do for you. And he came back and said, you could probably do a lot for me, LOL. I suppose I am being a bit pinched in my thinking. It's just that the only reason I can conceptualize for not being engaged sexually with humanity is misanthropy. There may be people out there with no sex drive. I just figured it was inherent and biological and therefore unalterable, except for an act of sheer will. And I replied, to say yes, you made it clear that your inability to imagine anyone who feels differently about sex than the way you expect leads you to believe that asexuality only really makes sense if a person actually hates everyone and everything. No need to repeat it. So you'll notice that along with the general ignorance there, he had to throw in a sex joke, saying I could probably do a lot for him, LOL. It's almost like they just can't not do that. They have to find various ways of being a jerk. So here's another one. This person opens with, do you like any intimacy? And I replied, you might need to be a bit more specific in defining intimacy, but if you're talking about physical, romantic type interaction, I don't like it. They said, you know, hugs and kisses? So I said, no, I don't like being kissed. I don't mind hugs, and I'm not afraid of or averse to touch, but cuddling isn't comfortable for me. This person says, so, you're a different type of asexual. You are so cold, smiley face. And I said, that isn't how I'd describe it at all. Nobody who's ever met me would call me cold just because I don't enjoy cuddling. That's ridiculous. And he says, and no kissing? And I said, I already answered that question in my last mail to you. I do not like any kind of romantic/sexual kind of interaction physically at all. I think it's very inappropriate to suggest that means I'm cold. Are all heterosexual people who don't like kissing and cuddling with members of their own sex therefore cold? It doesn't make any sense to say someone is cold or frigid if they don't like cuddling or kissing with people they're not remotely attracted to. And he replies, that is so sad, smiley face. And I said, meh, troll. And the last intentionally negative message is this one, where they just wrote, asexual people have no soul. So as you can see, this is not an uncommon reaction to asexuality. They default to assuming there's something wrong with us. We're used to that. We're used to people thinking that we lack one of the most fundamental drives that they find motivates them, so they can't imagine that we're alive at all. I'm now going to offer a more nuanced perspective from someone who apparently genuinely wanted to learn, but did approach the conversation with, I would have to say, some misconceptions. I don't want to put this person in the same category as the previous three who, they began and end with the assumption something's wrong with us, trying to project and convince us that not being interested in sex or not being attracted to others sexually is connected to, as the first person said, misanthropy. So this person was communicating with me in the comments of a 6-part article in the Huffington Post that was released years ago, and I interviewed for this and I was featured in 2 of the parts. I believe this was comments on the 3rd part while the series was still being released, and the 4th part was coming out the next day, I think. So you'll hear a reference to that in here. This person opened with kind of a joke and wrote, do asexual people hang out in nay bars? And I said, there's not even an asexual night at the club, so hey, maybe you can start a nay bar, and we'll hang out there. If you build it, they will come. And the person said, do you feel uncomfortable in straight bars and/or gay bars? Would you feel more comfortable in a nay bar? Please explain. Do you consider kissing to be sexual or just romantic? Is your initial attraction to someone usually based on physical appearance or something else? I'm not criticizing, just curious. And they quoted, if you build it, they will come, and wrote, I thought they weren't into that. Sorry, I can't help myself when there's a pun begging to be recognized. Which, by the way, I should refer to this person by the pronoun he, because the commenter later identified himself as a straight man. So I said this. What's funny is I thought of it too. I almost wrote ba-dum-bum-ching or wink-wink nudge-nudge and then thought better of it. Let it not be suggested that asexual people can't have dirty minds. Though let's be honest and say that on an article about asexual people and masturbation, suggesting that they must not be into coming isn't really accurate. Ha. So he says, Ivy, I'm glad you empathized with my pun. However, I noticed you ignored the rest of my comment, which consisted of several questions. I hope I didn't offend you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just trying to understand what it's like to be you. You seem to be open to discussing the details of your orientation in your other comments, and those were questions that I didn't see addressed elsewhere in this section. This subject is very new to me. And I replied, odd, I didn't even see the rest of the comment when I was replying. Maybe my email didn't print it all. I don't go to bars at all, unless it's for karaoke, because I don't drink alcohol. I'm not interested in any bar scene that's singles-oriented either, since I'm not looking for a partner. I don't personally kiss or date or experience any initial attraction, so your questions aren't really applicable to me. I imagine you'd get different answers if you asked romantic asexual people. Their answers would vary within the romantic asexual group too, since we're just as diverse in what we experience as most other people. As for whether I personally consider kissing sexual, I know plenty of people who like kissing but don't feel sexually attracted to the people that they're kissing. But I also know plenty of people who like kissing who consider it a warm-up for other activities that lead to sex or sexual activity. The person replies, Thanks for your thoughtful answer, Ivy. So you're a non-romantic asexual? What does your social life consist of? Do you hang out with friends? Do you get along better with women, men, gays, straights, asexuals, or doesn't it matter? Have you ever met someone you felt a desire to get to know better? Someone you were attracted to on some level? Intellectual, spiritual, emotional, aesthetic, ideological? Could you see yourself ever forming a partnership with someone based on one of those types of attraction? Or maybe even to simply combine incomes for financial reasons? Or do you see yourself being single for your entire life? How do you feel about family members? Do you experience a form of love in that realm? If so, could you ever see yourself feeling that same kind of love for someone outside your family? Are you religious, spiritual, atheist, agnostic? I hope these questions aren't too personal, and I assure you that I have no desire or intent to criticize or judge you. You are who you are, and I respect that. I replied, we usually call it aromantic, and yes, I am. My social life is pretty much what most people's social life is. My friends and I do things we like doing, and have fun doing it. And though sometimes it involves going out in big groups, I prefer the one-on-one activities like baking with a friend. Yes, I have emotions toward other people. They're not romantic or sexual emotions. That's about it. I'm not different from most people in that I form friendships that are sometimes based on certain common interests and occasionally become very long-lasting and intense, but I don't ever desire exclusivity or domestic partnership or sex or romance with the people I love. I do intend to be single my whole life, yes. Some aromantic people still want partners that aren't romantic but are committed, but that doesn't happen to me. I like living alone. I think, do you experience love for your family? Is a pretty weird question. So let's just assume I feel the same way about everything but romance/sex as people normally do. And yes, some of my friends feel like a second family when I've known them for a long time and have built trust. And as for religion, I'm an atheistic pagan. Hooray! Tomorrow's article looks like it's going to be a lot about me. That's my picture. So maybe you can follow whatever links the author posts to learn more about me. The person replies, just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm, according to the chart, a hetero-romantic sexual male. A lot of people, including gays, read me as gay. But that's probably because I grew up in the theater and as a result had a lot of gay peers and role models at a rather early age. As a result, I have a lot of empathy for the LGBT community. As I mentioned, this whole asexual thing is very new to me. I actually find it much easier to understand the asexual part than to understand the aromantic part. Again, sorry if my question about love was awkwardly presented. I didn't mean to imply that you might be cold, robotic, alien, or inhuman. You come across as very rational, intelligent, balanced, open-minded, positive, considerate, and caring. I have two very close lesbian friends, and even though they are both very attractive, my awareness that sex with either of them isn't an option has an interesting effect on my relationship with each of them. With the question of sex out of the way, we are free to focus on other aspects of ourselves, which is kind of refreshing, and in my opinion, is one of the reasons why we are so close. Sex can contribute to a very strong bond between people, but can also sometimes complicate things and get in the way. I tend to be most attracted to women with whom I resonate on at least several different levels: intellectual, emotional, spiritual, aesthetic, and ideological, as well as sexual and romantic. In fact, I'd consider a partnership with a romantic asexual woman, whereas I wouldn't with a religious fundamentalist, cigarette smoker, alcoholic, Republican, don't get me started. I had a chance to read the new article and also watch some of your YouTube videos. Sorry to hear about the face-licking thing. Ew. One of the great things about sex is giving pleasure to each other. I can't begin to understand why someone would even want to have sex with someone who isn't interested. Obviously more of a control thing than a sex thing. Glad to see you're having some success in getting your ideas out there. I've certainly learned a lot in the last couple of days as a result of your work. Best wishes from a straight guy. And that's how we learn. I think some of the questions that this person asked come from a reasonable place. Wanting to understand another person is natural, especially if their perspective is one you have never heard before, like is obviously the case in this person. I do feel like it would be helpful if people who have questions about us will first consider, okay, if someone asked me this question, would I feel like the person was insulting me? Honestly, I kind of can't get past the idea that even if somebody is curious about me, that they would ask me, like, essentially, do you have emotions? Do you form relationships with other people? Do you have any of these other things? And do you love your family? It's just like, I mean, certainly there are people who would say no to that question, but they would be very much in the minority. And, you know, I've never talked to somebody that was straight and thought, since you're straight, let me ask, do you love your family? Just like, it's not a thing that you connect. So I felt a little bit strange about why someone would connect. Do you have positive feelings toward your family, or do you have do you have friendships that are based on other things? You know, just, I don't know. Nobody asks those questions when you're straight. Like, well, nobody asks those questions when you're straight based on you being straight. So let's put it that way. There are definitely straight people who have other intersections that might be asked those questions. For instance, there are a lot of people on the autism spectrum who, you know, there are these popular misconceptions that they don't have emotions, or that they can't have friendships, or that they fundamentally don't understand any kind of social interaction because of them being autistic, and they get questions like this too, even if they're straight. So I don't want to imply that nobody but us ever gets asked these questions, but, you know, we have a lot of things in common with the autistic community. You know, those of us who are asexual and not autistic will recognize a lot of the references that autistic people will be subjected to. And of course, those of us who are asexual and autistic will get it from both sides. So I don't happen to be an autistic person, but I have a lot of autistic friends. So I know they will recognize those kinds of comments. Yeah, I would suggest, if anybody watches my videos that wants to have a respectful interaction like that last person did, that maybe before asking certain questions, they find phrasing that doesn't kind of baldly show what assumptions they might be dealing with. Because even though this last person was nothing like the first three commenters who, you know, they wanted me to feel like something was wrong. They wanted me to connect to those things. They wanted me to feel like, well, obviously, if you're not interested in sex, there are all these other things that are obviously wrong with you. Whereas this person, he asked the questions because he wanted to understand what somebody's life was like if this isn't part of their life. But I think that he definitely was coming from a respectful place. He just may not have understood why the wording would feel weird to somebody who is asexual, who wants to educate other people, but sometimes has to deal with, you know, being treated like being robotic, or being inhuman, or not experiencing emotions would be a go with, you know. Just those things aren't a package deal. So even if you're not saying that you think we don't experience those things, asking us in conjunction with being asexual does suggest that you do connect those ideas. And I hope that it's clear to both that commenter and anybody watching this that those are not things that automatically go together. And most of us will be pretty forgiving if you stumble, if you say something strange, if you say something that feels really awkward or insulting at first glance. As long as you're not one of my first three commenters who's there to tell me that I don't have a soul, most of the time we'll be able to reach some kind of understanding. I do prefer that they don't emphasize, no, I'm here to be respectful. No, I'm respecting you. You know, I prefer that people don't keep emphasizing that, because most of the respectful interactions that I've had, it's clear that they are respectful. It's clear that they are here to understand and not to condemn. So it feels a bit like, no, I'm a nice guy. I'm being nice. You don't understand. I'm nice. You know, like, you don't usually need to tell me that if you are nice. So I prefer that they kind of show, don't tell in those situations. Anyway, that is where I will wrap up today. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.